I want to talk about the origins of posterior arch contact for the knee chest adjusting technique. This starts with three main players, Dr. Kale, Dr. Sherman, and of course, B.J. Palmer. The short story goes like this. Dr. Kale learned from the man who learned from the man. Dr. Kale was the only person to be an associate of Dr. Lyle Sherman. He learned from Dr. Lyle Sherman. Dr. Lyle Sherman was B.J. Palmer's right-hand man. He worked in the research centers. In fact, he was the director of the research center for a number of years. Dr. Sherman related to Dr. Kale that somewhere between 1937 and 1938, they shifted from the transverse process to the posterior arch as the contact point for the knee chest adjustment. Now, to put context to this story, and I think it's important to fill some holes, maybe put a little more richness in this story, let's talk about these three players, their relationships, and how this was passed down. First off, let's talk about Dr. Kale. I had the awesome privilege, along with a lot of other folks, to be able to hang out with Dr. Kale a lot, 35 years ago. And I have to tell you, it's a great blessing in my life that I was able to be around him. He's an awesome man. He was a once-in-a-generation man. He was an old throwback from when they lived and died and went to jail for chiropractic. That was definitely him. He was a staunch believer in the power of upper cervical. In fact, when I say a believer, that kind of undersells it. He was a fierce component of it. He was a warrior. It was in every cell of his being. You couldn't move him from his belief system. He was a force of nature. He was a master. He was an artisan. He was a Picasso at doing the knee chest technique. Absolutely incredible. He was a man full of charisma. He was the kind of person, if you walked in the room, whether it was 3 or 4 people in the room or 300 or 400 people, it didn't make any difference. When he walked in, everybody looked at him. It's like a magnet. He just had that something extra special about him. People were attracted to him. He dressed right. He wore the right shoes. He was very particular about the way he did things in his life. When you were around him for any time at all, you got the feeling like you better get to work, because he was on task, he was on the job, and so on and so forth. One of the claims that he made was this. He said, "I learned from the man who learned from the man." He was, and this is no shade on Dr. Kale, but Dr. Kale was not an originator or an innovator, if you will, in the classical sense of trying to come up with a new way to do the adjustment. He wasn't trying to find a new contact. He wasn't trying to come up with a new way to read x-rays, a new way to read the graph. He wasn't trying to do all that. He very specifically prided himself in the fact that he learned from the man who learned from the land, and he was following a recipe, and this is very important to understand. In his staunch belief in chiropractic, he used to tell a story. He told a lot of different stories. This is something come off the top of my head as I'm sitting here. He used to tell a story. It was like he was walking on ice, and B.J. Palmer was a judge standing over him, and he'd walk on the ice, and he'd have a hard case. That's what he was, kind of a metaphor. And he'd hear the ice crink underneath his feet, and he'd look up and say, "B.J., is it going to hold?" And B.J. said, "Is the line straight?" And Kale said, "Yeah, the line's straight, but the ice is cracking." And B.J. said, "It'll hold. Stay the course." He used to use that as a metaphor. He had a lot of things a lot of things that he would say that would actually bring him into that process. I remember one time we were in Russia on a mission trip in the early 90s, maybe the mid 90s, somewhere like that. It actually could have been Moldova. Anyway, he was doing a presentation in front of a bunch of medical doctors. Medical doctor raised his hand and said, "Hey, what kind of conditions is this good for?" He turned around to the chalkboard and wrote "all" about 50 times. And he just said, all, every condition. It doesn't make any difference, right? So that was his belief system. If somebody came up to him, like at a soccer field or outside where he's doing something with his kids, somebody came up to him and they'd ask him, "Can you help?" And before they even said what it is, he said, "Yes, I can help." And they'd be like, "Well, you didn't even tell me what it is. I didn't even tell you what it is." "It doesn't matter. I can help you." So he had a very staunch, hardcore belief system in chiropractic. So just as a few things, he had a tremendous sense of humor. I remember one time he told this story, and Dr. Randy Kale will have to verify this. And, memory can be fickle, and some people have different perspectives of what happens. So I would invite Dr. Randy to give his input on this. He came off the mission field, I think it was Moldova, got a call from Dr. Randy, and Dr. Randy's daughter had been bit by a pit viper snake. So he said, come on over to the hospital, Dad. And of course, he went over there, and they devised a plan. The plan was Randy was going to go to the door and watch out to make sure nobody walked in, and Cale was going to adjust his granddaughter. So he did that. He adjusted his granddaughter. Well, right after he adjusted him, here comes the head nurse walking in. The head nurse asked, he said, hey, have they started the anti-venom? And Dr. Cale said, I just did that. And he said, did they start the antibiotic? And Dr. Cale said, I just did that. So, of course, this points out two very important characteristics about Dr. Cale that I think are important to know. Number one, his sense of humor. He had a great sense of humor. And it was the kind of sense of humor that didn't come from, like, being a clown. It was a sense of humor that came from somebody who has a high intellect. He had the amazing ability to observe a situation, know what to say, what to do, how to react. He could see in real time. Sometimes I'll observe a situation. It takes me 3 days to figure it out. Dr. Cale was one of those kind of unique individuals could know right away. The other thing this story points out is his belief in chiropractic. Even though his child had been bit, or his granddaughter had been bit by a pit viper snake, he knew, he turned the power on, she was going to heal. He was in full faith. And by the way, she did. All worked out very, very well. As I said, he was very particular about how he held himself, very specific, and he was a great businessman. I don't know if you know this, but Dr. Cale was actually honored by the Chamber of Commerce of Spartanburg, which is a city, as businessman of the year. One time we were, just to illustrate a little bit of this, one time I was out with him teaching. He had asked me to come to Life West with him to teach a module in the knee chest work. Before we got there, we shared a room, and we were getting ready to leave to go to teach. And he looked at me and he said, Rob, your tie is about a half inch too long. Well, there's a certain spot where the end of your tie is supposed to hit your belt buckle. He knew all that stuff, right? And he was very particular. He said, let's have you retie your tie. So, of course, I did. I didn't know any better, so we retied his tie. Another thing that kind of illustrates some of his character and how he reacted is after that seminar was over, we drove up the north. We were in San Francisco, so we drove up north. His brother and sister-in-law lived up there, probably 2 hours away. I don't remember at this time. But anyway, he had me drive. I was driving up there. He's kind of in a hurry. So I'm driving on the edge of the speed limit. I'm driving probably 75, maybe 80 miles an hour. I don't really remember the time. But this illustrates some of the things that Dr. Cale always wanted to have things lined out. Always wanted to make sure, he always had the backup plan no matter what. He always had that. He used to say this, by the way, what are you going to do if you hear screeching brakes and it's coming behind you? What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to jump up straight so the car can go underneath me. He had every situation figured out. This is just kind of funny. Anyway, so we're riding down the road. I'm driving over the speed limit, and he looks over at me. We're all buddies, and I would say buddies, but I was definitely a mentee and just hanging on him, right? So he looks at me and says, now, Rob, if you get a speeding ticket, you're paying for it. So, this is just some few stories about Dr. Cale. Now, going back to the point of the posterior arch. Dr. Cale prided himself on the fact that he learned from the man that learned from the man. He was following a recipe. He used to say it this way. If somebody comes to me with something new in chiropractic, or somebody has a thought about chiropractic, or I think about something about chiropractic, I hold volume 18 up. I'll put a piece of paper and run it through it. If it doesn't cut muster, then I'm not doing it, right? So he didn't do anything that wasn't that he didn't learn. Now, volume 18, you have to keep it in context. It was the soft release of volume 18 was December of 1933. The hard release was in the early part of 1934. This was before they started the research center. Research center started, of course, in 1935. So that leads us to Dr. Lyle Sherman. Who is Dr. Lyle Sherman? Dr. Lyle Sherman, as we said, was somewhere around 1942, 1943. He became the director of the research center, the B.J. Palmer Research Center. He was working in the research center in the 30s as well. I want to make one comment about Dr. Sherman before we go any further. That is this, that Dr. B.J. is not going to hire no slouch to be the director, his right-hand man in his pride and joy, the research center. He's not going to do that. One of the things that you're going to see with great men and great women is they have the ability to observe. They can observe who to put in what position. And he put Lyle Sherman in that position because he saw Lyle Sherman as a man of integrity, a man of character. He saw him a man of ability. He was the right person for that job. There's no way BJ would have had him in that job if he wasn't a solid person. Dr. Lyle enjoyed a great reputation throughout the chiropractic profession. He held chiropractic in high esteem, and chiropractic held him in high esteem. He was, as I said, a man of integrity, is very particular about the way he did things, and the way, very particular, he was a scientist. Now let's move on to the relationship between Dr. Cale and Dr. Sherman. Well, as it turns out, Dr. Cale entered into Palmer School of Chiropractic in 1961, just a couple of months after B.J. Palmer had passed away. B.J. Palmer passed away May of 1961. Dr. Cale, being the observer that he was, he realized that he wanted to hitch his wagon with Dr. Sherman. He wanted to be an associate of Dr. Sherman. Well, as it turned out, about once a year, maybe more, Dr. Lyle Sherman would come to Palmer. One would be to come to the Lyceum. When he came to Palmer, every time he came, Cale would come up to him and he'd say, "I want to be an associate of yours." And every time, Lyle Sherman would say, "No, I don't want an associate, I need an associate," and so on and so forth. Well, as it turns out, as Providence would have it, Lyle Sherman finally relented right when Cale had graduated. He said, "Yes, come in with me to be an associate." One of those things that just show you what kind of scientist that Lyle Sherman was that before Cale could come and work with him, he had Cale do a personality test to make sure that they were going to be compatible, and of course, they were. So Lyle Sherman practiced in Spartanburg, South Carolina, beginning around 1955. Just to show you the kind of scientist that Lyle Sherman was. Lyle Sherman wanted to move to the southeast of the United States. Didn't know where to go. How he picked it was this, and this is how Cale related to us. He actually found out which city had the least amount of mosquitoes per square foot, and it happened to be Spartanburg, and that's how he settled on Spartanburg. Interesting. If he had settled somewhere else, then Sherman College might have very much been there. Now, he didn't start Sherman College. It was his namesake. So Cale comes in to work with Dr. Lyle Sherman. Now, as an interesting note, at that time they were doing primary knee chest, side posture. They were doing side posture, drop head piece at Palmer, and that's what Cale learned on. So Cale goes into Lyle Sherman's clinic, and keep in mind, Lyle Sherman was doing exclusively knee chest adjusting. This is what he did. This is what he did in the research center, and this is what he did. Cale came in and said, "Hey, I'd like to bring in my side posture table." Well, you have to keep in mind, first off, Lyle Sherman was kind of on the fence whether he's going to have Cale come in anyway. But this to show the kind of character that Lyle Sherman had. He allowed Dr. Cale to come into his clinic and use side posture. Why? He was a scientist. He didn't have, he wasn't selling seminars. He didn't have a bias. He didn't have an agenda. He's like, okay, if you want to come in, just see how you do. If you can clear the readings, get sick people well, then that's fine with me. Well, it didn't take too long for Dr. Cale to see the response that he was getting, that Dr. Sherman was getting, and then, of course, he wanted to learn from Dr. Sherman. Another story to illustrate Dr. Sherman and his kind of attitude and way he did. He was a very direct person. He was a generous man, but he was very direct. One time, Cale comes in to the clinic with a short sleeve shirt and a tie on, no coat. So Dr. Sherman, as I said, was very professional. He held chiropractic professional, and he wanted people to hold chiropractic in a high light. So he saw Dr. K, and by the way, it could be 100 in Spartanburg, 100 degrees outside, 100 humidity, and just sweltering in this one of those days. And so he walks in, and Dr. Sherman says, "Where's your coat?" And Cale said, "Well, it's kind of hot out here." And Sherman said, "Go home, get your coat. You look like a Sears repairman. We're professionals here." So very direct, go home, get your coat on. Of course, I think some of those characteristics that Dr. Sherman passed on, I believe that we saw some of those characteristics. He held it off. Now, just to give you an example, they were seeing the worst of the worst cases. Dr. Sherman saw all cases, all walks of life, baby to grave, whatever it was. He saw the patients. He wasn't afraid to see anybody. They had a lady came in that had breast cancer. She had breast cancer. She was late stage. It was late enough that she had open sores. And those open sores smelled so bad that they had to literally have her come in at lunchtime to get checked because it was just gassing out the clinic. She wasn't doing anything else. She just did upper cervical care. That was around 1965. So Dr. Cale, 1995, called the lady because she was still alive and invited her to come out to one of the seminars. For whatever reason, it didn't work out, but she was still alive 30 years after she had gone under care with Dr. Lyle Sherman for breast cancer. Now, Dr. Sherman didn't have a cancer clinic. It just illustrates that he was seeing some very serious cases, wasn't afraid to see those cases. Dr. Sherman was a very generous man. Usually Saturdays, he would have chiropractors from all over the United States come just to learn at his feet. So Dr. Cale was going to associate with him for about 3 years and then move on and get his own clinic, own practice. And as it would happen, an unfortunate, fortunate thing. Dr. Lyle Sherman was burning sugarcane in his backyard, and toxins from burning sugarcane can be really lethal to you. Well, as it turns out, from him breathing in these fumes, he became deathly sick. He was so sick that he was pretty much bedridden for about a year, and he couldn't see patients. And so instead of moving on, Dr. Cale stayed on with him, and when he stayed on with him, he saw Dr. Sherman's patients as well as his. But as I said, it was unfortunate for Dr. Sherman, fortunate for the posterity of Nietzsche's work, because as they were working for 3 years, they're busy. They're seeing patients, they're doing what they're doing, running a clinic and doing so on and so forth. They didn't have that slow down time where they can just sit and talk. Well, as it turned out, Dr. Cale would go over nearly daily and check Dr. Sherman to see if he needed to be adjusted or whether he was running clear, as well as take care of any needs. Well, it was that period of time that Dr. Cale was able to have a slow down, sit down, and hear those stories. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall, listening to them discuss, and having Lyle Sherman talk about all the stories from the research center, all those cases, like the McCarthy case, the 5-year-old that's having seizures, and after about a week or two of care, seizures got up to over 100 a day. And Lyle goes to B.J. Palmer and says, "Hey, the McCarthy case had some seizures, but now they've multiplied. Now they're 100 or more a day." And B.J. Palmer told Lyle Sherman, "Is the reading clear?" And Lyle said, "Yes." He said, "Well, don't get sympathetic." Very interesting. Don't get sympathetic to the family. BJ wasn't trying to be hardcore, but he knew if that line was straight, those seizures would get better, and certainly they did. So Lyle Sherman's relating all these different stories. Well, one of the things that he related in that time, he said somewhere between 1937 and 1938, they shifted from the transverse process to the posterior arch. An amazing time Dr. Cale must have had being around him. And I got to say this, we owe a lot of respect and a lot of honor to Dr. Cale. If you're listening to this right now and you're doing Nietzsche's work, if it were not for Dr. Cale, you would not be doing Nietzsche's work. He was the one that carried the banner. We all owe all honor and respect due to Dr. Kale for carrying this work on and making sure that it stayed through posterity. Dr. Kale was an amazing man. He would tell stories that would relate to things that he heard from Lyle Sherman, that Lyle Sherman dealt with and experienced with B.J. Palmer. And Dr. Kale would also relate his own life circumstances in his cases to help build faith in us in upper cervical and the power of upper cervical. If it wasn't for Dr. Kale, if he didn't have the character that he had, this would not have gone on. So we owe a lot of gratitude to Dr. Kale. So now, as it comes to transverse process and posterior arch contact, we have to ask ourselves, given these stories, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. Number 1, did Dr. Kale shift from the transverse process to posterior arch? So in other words, did he learn transverse process from Lyle Sherman, and then when he got away from Sherman, went to the posterior arch? There's nothing that I saw in all the years, and I'm going to say others can back me up on this who are around Dr. Kale. There was nothing that would contradict what he taught us in that adjusting technique. He prided himself in learning from the man, learn from the man. He learned the recipe and he followed it. So it does not make logical sense that he would have shifted. He had no reason to shift it, and there was nothing that he ever did that would make me think that he did that. So it just makes no sense. That did not happen. There's just no way that happened. The next question: did Lyle Sherman work in the research center for the years that he worked in the research center, and then go to private practice and say, well, I just want to do it a different way? He was a man of science. Why would he do that? It doesn't make sense that he would have done that. Which brings us to the third question. If he did do that, and this question even hurts to even ask. I feel defiled, if you will, even asking this question. But if Lyle Sherman did shift from the transverse process to the posterior arch, why did he lie to Dr. Kale and tell him that? He didn't. He was a man of integrity, a man of character, a man of science. He was not trying to make a name for himself. He had a name. He was not trying to honor himself. He was not trying to sell seminars. There was absolutely no reason for him in any way to change the contact or to lie about it. So when it comes down to it, the posterior arch is a superior way of doing the knee chest technique. I want to talk just briefly about, I do a teaching called Knee Chest Advantages, and let me just say this. I am not in the league of Dr. Kale. I'm not in the league of Dr. Sherman whatsoever. I don't hold myself out to be, and I really don't want anybody to even put me in that league. I do not deserve to be in that league. These people were geniuses at what they did. They were far and above the average cut of individual. And so I'm very happy to have been around Dr. Kale, but I would say that's really more of the extent of it. I will say this: Dr. Kale adjusted me January 12th, 1991, and it was a life-changing event for me. When he adjusted me, I just internally, instinctively knew that I was going to dedicate at least some of my life to be able to understand what exactly he did, because I knew that there was some power that was released when he did that, and I made that my quest. And here again, I don't want to single myself out. I would say other people have made that quest as well. Let's talk a minute about the posterior arch. First off, in B.J. Palmer's great work, Volume 18, he suggested that we could actually call the adjustment an unlockment. He said, I don't think that we should change the name of it, but you could call it an unlockment. And what did he mean by that? When we do the knee chest table adjustment, when we get that audible, it unlocks that atlas relative to the condyle, and then innate recoils it into its normal, perfect seated position, given that we've given the adjustment at the right place, right time, right manner, right intention, and all those things that have to go into the factor to making that adjustment with that extra something. So Given that, when you turn your head maximally to the right or left, the atlas will go down the hill relative to its respective condyle. So when you turn the head, the atlas goes down. That's the reason why side posture adjusting is different than knee chest. When you're on the side posture, the transverse process is superior because you're going to torque and toggle it around. You're going to torque. That's how you torque and toggle the atlas around its respective condyle. But when the condyle goes down inferior to, when the atlas lateral mass goes down inferior relative to the condyle, you need to drive the atlas lateral mass. And if you look at, and we've done Blair views and done different things where you turn your head maximally, you can see how that atlas goes this way down relative to the condyle. The other thing is this: when you turn your head maximally, at the very end of the movement, the condyle is going to back up about 4 degrees. It's called paradoxical motion. So you're going to have the condyle going this way, the atlas going this way, and it's going to be inferior. So you're going to drive that lateral mass around the condyle. When you look at a Blair view, you can see it very plainly when the head's in maximal rotation. You can see how that posterior arch is the perfect lever to send that lateral mass right around that condyle. When you get on the transverse process, you're a little away from that perfect line of drive. You're going to make the adjustment a little more rough. It's going to be a rougher adjustment, and you're not going to get as many long-term holding of the adjustment. Anything that you do with a knee chest adjustment that increases the amount of force and decreases the amount of smoothness in adjustment is going to be less efficient. I've got a lot more on this. If anybody's interested, maybe we'll put together a class. I'll be happy to do it as a webinar that we can sit down and go through this and talk about the logistics of this. For this talk right here, I don't want to get bogged down with that. I apologize even now for me going through that the last couple of minutes. There's much more teaching on that. What I really wanted to get across the point is this: that Dr. Kale learned from the man who learned from the land. He was following a recipe. And when he said it was a posterior arch, it was and it is the posterior arch. Thank you guys so much for listening to this video.